These tractors shaped the backbone of American farming, and yet most people have never even heard of them. From modest single-cylinder engines to twin-powered diesel beasts with flywheels the size of a man. Here are the 15 rarest American tractors that time almost forgot. 1. Leader Model D Orchard Tractor.
Factory was started by Lewis Brockway and Walter Brockway. The original tractor.
Yep, Henry's 1944 Leader, the mighty Model A. They only made 12 of them. There's only 3 left.
The Leader Model D Orchard Tractor is one of the rarest tractors ever made in the U.S. It was built in Ohio in the early 1940s by the Leader Tractor Company. What makes it so special is that only 12 Orchard versions were ever made before World War II stopped production. This version of the Model D was designed specifically for working in orchards, which means it had to move carefully between trees without damaging the crops. So, it came with full fenders covering the wheels to protect the fruit branches from getting scratched or broken. Its design was simple but smart. The tractor had a smooth, narrow body and curved edges that allowed it to move easily through tight spaces like apple orchards or vineyards. It was also small enough to turn in narrow paths, which made it really useful for orchard farmers. Sadly, because only a handful were made and time has taken its toll, very few of these tractors are still around today. Some collectors and vintage tractor fans might never even see one in person. 2. Elgin Rototiller Tractor. The Elgin Rototiller tractor is one of the strangest and rarest tractors ever built. It came out sometime in the 1930s and was made by a small company in Illinois that didn't last very long. This tractor wasn't like the usual tractors you'd see on a farm. Instead of front wheels, it had spinning blades that acted like a rototiller to move it forward. It looked more like a garden machine on steroids than a regular tractor. The idea was to create a machine that could break up the soil and move at the same time. It was powered by a tiny 2-stroke engine, which made it lightweight and easy to use, but it didn't have a lot of power compared to regular tractors. Because it was so different and kind of weird looking, it didn't catch on with most farmers. Only a few were ever built, and almost all of them disappeared over time. Today, if someone finds one of these machines, it's considered a super rare collectible. 3. Panther Pup Orchard Tractor.
Beefy 903 cubic inch V8 Cummins turbo engine. And with all the power it packs, there's nothing that would ever make the Steiger stagger.
Well, anyway, let's just say this Steiger is one big green hulk of a tractor.
The Panther Pup is a small but powerful tractor that was built in Minnesota during the 1960s. It was made by a tiny company that wanted to give farmers a compact 4-wheel drive tractor that could do the work of a much bigger machine. What made it special was that it looked like a miniature version of the Big Bud tractors, tough, strong, and ready to work. But unlike the giant machines that needed huge farms, the Panther Pup was made for smaller jobs and tighter spaces. It had a full 4-walled system, which was a big deal back then for a small tractor. That meant it could work well even in muddy or rough fields without getting stuck. It was perfect for farmers who needed power but didn't have a lot of room to use big machines. Only a few dozen of these tractors were ever made, so today they're considered super rare. Collectors love them because they look cool, work well, and are part of the early history of compact 4-wheel tractors. 4. Centaur KV Tractor. The Centaur KV tractor was made in the 1920s by the Centaur Tractor Corporation in Ohio, and it was definitely different from most tractors of its time. One of the weirdest things about it was how the driver sat, sideways, not facing forward. That's right, the seat was turned to the side so the driver could watch the rows of crops while working. It might have sounded smart for row crop farming, but honestly, it just made it really awkward to drive. You had to twist your body to control it properly, and that wasn't very comfortable or safe. Another unique thing about this tractor was that it used a friction drive system instead of regular gears. This means it worked by pressing a wheel against a spinning disc to create movement. It was kind of like how some old washing machines worked. While that system could work fine in perfect conditions, it wasn't very durable for farm work. It would wear out quickly, especially when used on rough land or in bad weather. Because of its odd design and the friction drive not being super reliable, the Centaur KV didn't sell well. Only around 100 units were ever sold, and very few have survived. Even back then, farmers wanted machines that were easy to use and would last, and the KV didn't check those boxes. Farmaster FG33.
Regard to it, they did a cute name, Farm Master, you know, it's what the name implies, but it couldn't master anything.
The Farmaster FG33 was a tractor from the 1950s that not many people know about today. It wasn't made by a big-name company like Ford or John Deere. Instead, it was a private label tractor sold through Gamble stores, which were kind of like Sears back in the day. These tractors were actually made by a smaller company called Custom Manufacturing Co., and then they were rebranded and sold under the Farmaster name. Pretty smart business move, but unfortunately, it didn't last very long. The FG33 only stayed on the market for a few years before it was discontinued, which means not many were ever built in the first place. That already makes it rare, but what's even cooler is that for a small brand tractor, it came with some pretty advanced features for its time. It had a reliable engine, good hydraulics, and strong build quality. Farmers who used it said it worked great for small to medium jobs like plowing fields or hauling stuff around. It wasn't flashy, but it got the job done. Even though it was solid, the brand didn't take off. Maybe because there were too many other options, or maybe people just didn't trust store-brand tractors. Over time, most of these tractors were either scrapped, left in barns, or forgotten. And trust me, it only gets crazier from here. Coming up is a tractor with no seat and one that was made entirely from car parts during a war. You do not want to miss what's next. 6. Fagioli Walking Tractor. The Fagioli Walking Tractor is one of the most unique tractors ever made in the United States. It was created in the 1920s by the Fagioli brothers, who were more famous for making buses and trucks. But at one point, they had the idea to design a walking tractor. And no, it didn't walk by itself like a robot. It's called a walking tractor because the farmer had to walk behind it, kind of like how you use a lawnmower. This machine didn't have a seat, so you had to guide it by walking and steering at the same time. It looked more like a giant tiller than a normal tractor. It had small wheels and a single-cylinder engine, and its job was to plow soil and prepare land in tight spaces where big tractors couldn't go. In a way, it was built for people who had smaller farms or gardens and didn't need a giant machine. The idea was pretty smart, especially for the time, and it could have worked for a lot of farmers. But even with its creative design, it didn't really catch on. Only one prototype is known to still exist today, which makes it incredibly rare. Part of the problem was that it was ahead of its time, and most farmers just weren't ready to switch from horses or regular tractors to something so different. 7. Mealy-Bloomberg MB110.
The tractor and extended the front of it to make that length, the longer length for better grading. And so that's what the most unique part of it is. Had some power steering.
The Mealy-Bloomberg MB110 was a strange-looking tractor that came out in the late 1930s. It was built in Wisconsin by a small company that was part Swiss and part American. That's why the brand sounds kind of European. What made the MB110 stand out the most was its weird triangular steel body and its rear-mounted engine. Most tractors had the engine up front, but this one flipped the design. The result? It looked almost like something from outer space. People even joked that it looked more like a sci-fi machine than a farm tool. Even though the design was cool and very different, it wasn't very popular. It didn't help that World War II broke out soon after, and most of these tractors were scrapped for metal to support the war effort. So even though a few MB110s were built, almost all of them were lost. Today, it's super rare to find one, if any are even left. Most people have never even heard of it unless they're hardcore tractor collectors. 8. Ward's Twin-Row Tractor.
We have a 1941 Ward's Twin-Row, and this was, your classic tractor story. Ran when it was parked 30 years ago.
The Ward's twin-row tractor was made in the 1950s for Montgomery Ward, a big mail-order store kind of like Sears. But it wasn't actually built by them. It was made by a third-party company and just sold under the Ward's name. That kind of thing was pretty common back then. What made this tractor stand out was its strange seat and engine layout. Instead of the usual straight setup, the seat and engine were placed side by side, which looked kind of awkward but was actually meant for a smart reason: twin-row planting. The idea was that by adjusting the tractor layout, it could better plant 2 rows of crops at the same time, saving farmers time and effort. It sounds clever, but not a lot of people were convinced. Only about 50 units were ever sold, and it never became popular. A lot of farmers probably just stuck with the standard designs they were used to. It was also more expensive to fix if anything went wrong, since the layout wasn't common. Today, the Ward's twin-row tractor is a super rare find. Most were either junked or forgotten, and hardly anyone even knows they existed. 9. Doodlebug homemade war tractors. During World War II, farm equipment was really hard to get. Factories were too busy building stuff for the war, like tanks and planes, and new tractors weren't being made like they used to be. So farmers had to get creative. That's when the Doodlebug tractors came into the picture. These weren't made by companies, they were homemade, built by regular farmers using whatever old car parts they could find. People took frames from old Ford, Chevy, or Studebaker cars and turned them into tractors. Each Doodlebug was unique. Some had wooden seats, some had no roof, and some looked like complete Frankenstein machines. But they worked, and that's what mattered. Farmers used them to plow, haul, and keep their farms running when nothing else was available. Most Doodlebugs had simple engines and basic controls, but they got the job done, and they were cheap to build, which was a huge plus during tough times. Today, these Doodlebugs are more than just old tractors. They're symbols of American creativity and survival. Some are still sitting in barns covered in dust, while others have been restored and shown at antique tractor shows. 10. Love Tractor Model R. The Love Tractor Model R was a small but pretty advanced tractor built back in 1946 by a guy named Vernon Love. This wasn't made by some big company. It was more of a personal invention. Vernon only made a few of these tractors before selling off the design to someone else. But even though not many were built, this little machine was seriously ahead of its time. It came with full hydraulics and a mid-mount mower, which were features you didn't normally see on tractors back then. Most tractors in the 1940s were still really basic, but this one already had smart upgrades. The mid-mount mower made it super useful for people who had to mow under trees, near fences, or in tight spots. The hydraulic system let you easily lift or lower implements, which saved time and effort. Farmers today would expect features like that on modern compact tractors, but in 1946, this was cutting-edge stuff. It just wasn't something most people were ready for yet, so it didn't sell much. That's probably why the design got passed on instead of going big. All right, we're halfway through, but wait till you see numbered 14. It's so massive, people thought it was a steamroller, not a tractor. 11. Schultz Model 30. The Schultz Model 30 was a small farm tractor made between 1937 and 1940 in Iowa by the Schultz Tractor Company. Not many people know about it today, mostly because it was only made in super limited numbers, less than 75 units total. But even with those low numbers, the Model 30 had a really cool feature that was way ahead of its time: an offset engine. Basically, instead of putting the engine in the center like most tractors, the Schultz had the engine off to one side. This gave the farmer a clear view of the row they were working on, which was super helpful for planting and cultivating. It might not sound like a big deal now, but back in the late 1930s, this was a pretty unique idea. In fact, International Harvester would later use a similar design on the Farmall Cub, which became really popular. So you could say the Schultz Model 30 did it first. It just didn't get the credit it deserved. Unfortunately, it didn't take off because people were sticking to more familiar tractor layouts. Because the Schultz Tractor Co. didn't last long and made so few machines, finding a Model 30 today is really rare. 12. Wagner TR-14. The Wagner TR-14 was a massive four-wheel drive tractor that came out in 1954, made by the Wagner Company. Back then, big four-wheel tractors weren't very common, so this machine was a real monster for its time. Wagner was one of the early companies that focused on articulated tractors, those big ones that bend in the middle when they turn. What made the TR-14 even cooler was that it was built using military surplus parts from World War II. That's right, this tractor was basically made from leftover parts that were originally meant for Army vehicles and heavy-duty equipment. Some of the TR-14 models even used dual engines, which means two engines working together to give the tractor insane power. That might sound crazy, but it worked. The tractor was designed for really big jobs, like deep plowing or heavy hauling on huge farms. It had big tires, a tough frame, and tons of pulling strength. But because it was so large and expensive, not a lot of farmers could afford it or had enough land to even use it properly. That's one reason why only a few TR-14s were ever made. Today, seeing a Wagner TR-14 is almost impossible. Only a handful are known to still exist, and most are in private collections or old farmyards. 13. Service Gilson Suburban Tractor. The Service Gilson Suburban Tractor came out in the 1960s and was made for people who needed something small for their lawn or small farm jobs. You couldn't buy this at a regular tractor dealership. Instead, it was sold through mail-order catalogs, which was kind of like online shopping back in the day. You'd pick out the model you wanted, fill out a form, and have it delivered to your home. Only a few hundred of these tractors were ever made, which already makes it rare today. It was a small, lightweight tractor with a gear drive system, and it looked like something between a lawnmower and a tiny farm tractor. But it had a big flaw. Because it was so light, it was really easy to tip over, especially if you were using it on uneven ground or trying to pull something too heavy. That made it a bit dangerous, and a lot of people ended up getting rid of theirs. Over time, most of them were scrapped or just left to rust away in sheds and barns. 14. Morrison Big Boy. The Morrison Big Boy was a heavy-duty tractor made in the 1930s by Morrison Machinery, a small company based in Indiana. Right away, you can tell this thing was built for serious work. It had giant iron wheels, a huge frame, and an oversized engine that made it look less like a tractor and more like a steamroller. Seriously, if you saw one rolling across a field, you might think it was a construction machine instead of farm equipment. The Big Boy was made for pulling massive loads, breaking hard ground, and handling the roughest jobs on big farms. It was strong, no doubt about it. But because it was so large and kind of awkward to operate, not every farmer could handle it or even needed something that big. Plus, it was probably a lot more expensive than other tractors at the time. That's why it was only produced in small numbers, and not many were sold. Its huge iron wheels were both a strength and a weakness. They gave it tons of grip and power, but also made it super heavy and hard to steer on softer soil. It also didn't go very fast, so it wasn't great for driving across long distances. 15. Keck Gonnerman Model 30-60. The Keck Gonnerman Model 30-60 was a huge, powerful prairie tractor made in the early 1920s by a small company from Indiana. This thing wasn't just big, it was a total beast. It had a twin-cylinder engine that was so large it needed a flywheel the size of a full-grown man. That's not even an exaggeration. When this tractor was running, you could hear it from across the field. It made deep, slow chugging sounds that let everyone know it was working. This tractor was built for large farms on the prairie, where farmers needed to pull heavy plows through tough soil. With 30 horsepower at the drawbar and 60 at the belt, it had enough strength to handle almost any job. But it was also super expensive to buy and maintain. And because it was so massive, it wasn't very practical for smaller farms. To make things worse, when World War II started, the government began collecting scrap metal to help the war effort. A lot of these old tractors, especially big ones like the Model 3060, were melted down and used to build tanks, ships, and planes. That's why so few are still around today. If you saw one you've never heard of before, hit that like button and tell us which one surprised you the most in the comments.